Welcome to the Chapter 5 lecture video on job stress. In this video, we will define stressors and strains, discuss why some employees are more stressed than others, and talk about why stress is important. Stress is a topic that is relatable to every single person. Even if you don't have a lot of work experience, you likely have felt stress in school, at home, while planning a trip, or when engaging in extracurricular activities. Stress is defined as a psychological response to demands that possess certain stakes, that is, those demands that are important or impactful. Within the workplace, stress arises when impactful demands tax or exceed the capabilities and or resources of the employee. Thus, stress can be thought of as being the function of the nature of the demands as well as the capabilities of the person. The actual demands the employee experiences that cause the stress are known as stressors, whereas the negative consequences of those demands are called strains. So when we talk about stress in the workplace, we often conceptualize it as a function of the stressor-strain relationship. So stressors being the demands and then strains being those negative outcomes. And unfortunately, high stress on the job is more prevalent than it has ever been before. In fact, recent research shows that 40% of workers in the US feel that their jobs are very stressful or extremely stressful. And to understand what it means to feel stressed, it's helpful to consider the transactional theory of stress. The transactional theory of stress explains how stressors are perceived and appraised, as well as how people respond to those perceptions and appraisals. When an employee first experiences a demand, a primary appraisal process is triggered, where the employee evaluates the significance and the meaning of the demand they are confronting. At this point, an employee would determine if the demand causes them to feel stressed, and if it does, they will consider the implications of the stressor in terms of their personal and professional goals and overall well-being. When a job demand is appraised as not stressful, it's called a benign job demand. When a demand is appraised as stressful, on the other hand, it is either categorized as a challenge or a hindrance stressor. And it's important that you recognize the difference between challenge and hindrance stressors. Challenge stressors are the kinds of demands that people perceive as providing opportunities for learning, growth, and achievement. So they're viewed as a challenge because they're something that we can overcome and that allow us to develop over time. Hindrance stressors, on the other hand, are demands that are perceived to hinder goal progress and our progress towards like goal accomplishment and goal attainment. So they're hindrances because they impede our ability to grow. They impede our ability to do well. And although most demands are stressful, it is the hindrance stressors that are most problematic. So there are several common types of challenge stressors at work. The first is time pressure, which occurs when you feel you don't have enough time to complete a task. Although time pressure is stressful, employees tend to appraise situations with high time pressure as being more challenging than hindering, as the time pressure often provides a difficult but not impossible goal capable of being met. As we'll discuss in Chapter 6, difficult goals are very useful for motivating employees. Another challenge stressor at work is work complexity, which refers to the degree to which KSAs tax or exceed the capabilities of the employees. So work complexity forces employees to grow and develop in order to meet the required KSAs, making the stressor a challenge rather than a hindrance. And work responsibility is also a challenge stressor, as employees tend to view high responsibility as beneficial for their future. There are several common types of hindrance stressors as well. The first is role conflict, which occurs when there exists conflicting expectations that other people have for the employee. For example, some customer service reps are expected to communicate with as many customers as possible, as quickly as possible, while also being expected to be responsive to the questions and concerns of all customers. One role expects quick and speedy service over everything else, while the other role requires compassion and responsiveness to customers. In this case, the two roles are in conflict and cannot both be simultaneously handled successfully. As such, role conflict would be considered a hindrance thwarting goal progress. Another type of hindrance stressor in the workplace is role ambiguity, which involves a lack of information about what is expected and the needs to be done and what needs to be done for success in the specific role. Because goals and guidelines are unclear and performance standards are consistently changing, growth and learning is very difficult, thereby hindering goal attainment. Similarly, role overload occurs when the number of demand roles a person holds is so high that the person simply cannot perform all the roles effectively, which would also be a hindrance. And lastly, daily hassles or the day-to-day minor demands that get in the way of accomplishing the things we really need to accomplish are also considered a hindrance stressor because daily goal accomplishment is hindered. Now, after the primary appraisal process has ended and an employee has categorized the demand as being either benign, a challenge, or a hindrance, a secondary appraisal process begins. During the secondary appraisal process, employees ask themselves, what should I do and what can I do to overcome the demand? That is, they decide how to cope. So, coping mechanisms can be behavioral or cognitive, and they can also include problem solving or emotional regulation focuses. For example, a behavioral problem focused approach would be to work harder or seek out assistance, whereas a behavioral emotion focused approach would be to seek emotional support or to vent. A cognitive problem focused example would be to change priorities or strategies, while a cognitive emotion focused example would be to focus on the positive aspects of the demand or work environment. So, how do we experience strain? Our body has a set of responses that allow it to adapt and function in the face of stressful demands. However, if demands do not depreciate or if the demands occur too frequently without time for recovery, the body's adaptive response becomes ineffective. When we experience strain or the negative consequences of demands, our bodies secrete chemical compounds that increase our heart rate and blood pressure. This is why many people feel like warm or sweaty when confronting their fears, like public speaking or heights. When the chemicals in our bodies remain elevated for too long, the body begins to break down and several negative consequences become set in motion. These negative consequences include physiological, psychological, and behavioral strains. Some strains are physiological, originating in the immune, cardiovascular, musculoskeletal, and gastrointestinal systems in our bodies. For example, stressors can reduce the effectiveness of the body's immune system, making it more difficult to ward off illness and infection. Stressors can also harm the cardiovascular system, causing the heart to race, as well as increased blood pressure and creating coronary artery disease. Stressors can also cause problems like causing tension headaches, tightness, and pain in the body, affecting the skeletal system. And lastly, stressors can cause gastrointestinal problems in the form of stomach aches, indigestion, diarrhea, and constipation. Strains can also be psychological, resulting in psychological problems like depression and anxiety, burnout, anger, or hostility, things like irritability, forgetfulness, memory loss, among many other issues. And finally, strains can be behavioral, resulting in unhealthy behaviors such as grinding one's teeth, excessive smoking, or even like compulsive eating and drinking, or the engagement in CWBs and socially deviant or uncivil behaviors. Thus far, we've discussed how the typical person reacts to demands and stressors, but now we need to discuss how people differ in terms of how they react to those demands. One way people differ in their reactions to stress depends on whether they exhibit type A personality patterns or not. Type A people have a strong sense of time urgency and they tend to be a little impatient, hard driving, competitive, controlling, aggressive, and even hostile. In general, type A employees appraise demands as more stressful than those who aren't type A or as opposed to those that are type B. Another personality factor that matters is affectivity, not to be confused with affect, which we talked about in relation to moods and emotions. So when we talk about moods and emotions, affect is that current feeling, that feeling that you have in that split moment. Affectivity, on the other hand, is your general state of being. So this is the general mood that you're in. Employees high in negative affectivity consistently and inherently view the world pessimistically, focusing on negative aspects of their environment. So high negative affectivity employees consistently appraise demands as more stressful because they have that negative focus. Additionally, employees who haven't had sufficient time to recover also appraise demands as more stressful, as well as those who do not have social support, either in the form of like instrumental or direct support or emotional feelings based support. So, how important and costly is stress? The simple answer is very. Stressors in the stress process influence strains and ultimately people's health and well being. Stressors also have an impact on job performance and organizational commitment, among many other organizational outcomes. So please take a few minutes and review the linked video. I want you to pay particular attention to the numbers Rob Cook talks about and why those numbers are so high. This will be a question on your quiz, so pay close attention and make a note of those numbers. So how do organizations manage employee stress? The first step in managing stress is to assess the level and the sources of stress. A common way to accomplish this is with a stress audit, where managers and HR professionals consider common factors that cause stress in the workplace, things like large uncertainty or large scale change, elements of the work itself, and the quality of social relationships. Once a stress audit reveals that stress may be a problem, the next step is to consider alternative ways to reduce and eliminate or manage the stress. Some courses to reduce stressors include eliminating hindrance stressors or improving work life balance through things like job sharing, sabbaticals. Organizations can also provide resources as a means of managing stress. These resources can come in the form of training interventions, supportive practices, or other resource based approaches. Organizations can also reduce strains by providing time for relaxation or by teaching relaxation techniques, by providing cognitive behavioral programs, health and wellness programs, and EAP or employee assistance programs. So that is it for Chapter 5. If you have any questions, please email me at samantha.jordan@unt.edu.